Welcome, I am Madison Noelle, and this is You Are a Time Traveler and So Much More, an examination of how our modes of entertainment have an immense impact on the way that we digest time, which in turn alters our concept of self and reaction to gaze. Before I dive in, I would just like to call attention to a few disclaimers. I am exploring themes that are universal to human experience as a whole, such as time, or using the term universal a little more loosely, talking about contemporary American experience, specifically technology. But this is based upon the assumption that people hearing this right now have some form of interaction with technology and/or social media, or at the very least a notion and conception of what it is, and an understanding that it is a big player in the lives of the people they're sharing the world with. That being said, I have only experienced these quote-unquote universal themes through the point of view of my own life, and therefore I can only examine them through my eyes and by telling my own story. Each section of my thesis uses affirmative titles that describe a possible aspect of my listener's identity. This is not a finite list and is not meant to define or limit the individual listener, but to promote a sense of self-awareness on these themes. For example, I may say, "You are," but you can listen to this as, "Are you?" or "How do you define yourself in this aspect of life?" My grandmother never considered herself an artist, but always had a crochet hook in hand, working on a granny square blanket, and created more dutifully than any artist I've known. She taught me to crochet, to never waste, to always persevere because you either keep going or you stop. She was always picking up the broken pieces, whether they were emotional or a collection of scrap yarn from a yard sale, and working to salvage them. She started a blanket a few years ago that she gifted to me with the condition that I complete it. When she was in the hospital, COVID-era rules preventing my visitation, I was home adding more rings to the masterpiece she had started. When she returned home shortly before leaving us for good, I showed her how much progress I had made. I hugged her goodbye. "Keep working on that blanket," she said. Those were her last words to me. When she was gone, those blankets were the first things my family members were reaching for. I reached instead for the basket of unfinished granny squares. I looked not for something perfect and whole to be my memory. Instead, I needed to do what Grandma was always teaching us to do: pick up the pieces and muster the determination to continue on. The first act of my thesis defines three universal aspects of humanity. The first is that you are a narrative. To this point, I discuss everything from Shakespeare's "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players," to our own attempt to control the narratives we tell through social media, to the Duchampian immortalization of artwork through viewer discourse. Rather than spend my time convincing you that you are indeed a story, I will ask you to picture the narrative that I just shared, but also think of someone's life story that has changed you. Meditate on that power of a narrative before asking yourself, what narrative are you living through your life? Spoiler alert, that's not a question to answer in this moment, as much as one to just be conscious of in everyday life. This acknowledgement leads me to my second point: you are being watched. If we are all narratives, then we are all consuming narratives, and people are consuming ours. I'll let people make their own definitions of what this looks like in your life, whether your mind jumps to Big Brother conspiracies, your followers, or for those of us who have children in our lives, the simple fact that knowing whatever you do is noticed and absorbed and potentially repeated, and what that self-awareness does, or maybe does not do, to your thoughts as you live out your life. Finally, we have this perhaps cheesy phrase that you are a time traveler. In this section, I really delve into research on time and what that is and what it means to humanity. This title comes from the fact that we are all traveling through time, if only at one direction and one speed. I talk about how people can and have and will continue to debate or deny the existence of a deity or supernatural forces or a simulation writing the narrative of our lives, constructing fate, or governing humanity. But to me, the one constant driving force that does govern humanity, that people cannot debate or deny, is time, the continuous, unbroken passage of time, and the fact that we all become victims of time. With these universals, again used loosely, acknowledged, I dive into an examination on how entertainment impacts the way we think about these building blocks of self. To start, I studied the relationship between time and entertainment through the last couple of centuries, starting with the theater of 19th century France, because this was around the introduction of world standard time, the impact of time consciousness on the art of the period, particularly Impressionism, and the way theater emerged as a form of spectacle that provided an escape from time and memory through a narcosis of pleasurable fantasies rather than the simple numbing of the present. That last part is probably what is still the most relevant to entertainment today. Overall, live performance was still bound in time and space, requiring physical presence and present awareness to consume, and had a clear beginning and end. I briefly examined the vast array of technological development during the 20th century, which housed everything from the phonograph and radio to cable television and VHS tapes, and much more, which I do not have the time to describe. What I chose to focus on mainly for the 20th century was the popularization of film, both as a format to consume as well as a format to start capturing memories in one's own home. Physical presence was now negotiable, but a lot of media, such as cable, still had certain time restraints. Even with VHS tapes and digital video giving a way to physically and/or visually manipulate the timeline of a narrative, there is still a beginning and an end to the entertainment engagement. Now I bring you to the age of YouTube, Spotify, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. We have access to choose exactly what media we want to engage with, acting both as consumers and content creators. Content is individualized and can be accessed at any time in any space, allowing individuals to tailor their input to specific interests and choose not to look at things that do not immediately spark that interest, creating an entertainment bubble specific only to their experience. I will look at how this distorts our perception of the public and private space. Even when a consumer is physically viewable by others, the bubble of personal entertainment creates a sense of privacy even in the most public of spaces, and entertainment is now used as a signal to others that the viewer desires solitude. In this way, the boundaries between public spaces and private places are becoming increasingly blurred, you never know who's watching you or from where, and simultaneously strengthened, the exposure one can have without leaving the privacy of their home, as our social habits and forms of communication and entertainment evolve. Before I address the lack of beginning and end in much contemporary media, allow me to elaborate on this concept of distortion. When I ponder the spectacle's impact on our perception of reality, I noticed two distinct illusionistic experiences through which we suspend or escape reality. I will call them magic and distortion. Magic is a word that often comes up in my critiques. In this context, I view the word as an emotion, an abstract combination of memory and fantasy existing in the same sentiment, like a child reading a storybook and feeling that little sparkle that is inspiration, awe, curiosity, and wonder. It is knowing that you look at an illusion and, rather than trying to decipher the reality, allowing imagination to run free. I once knew someone who disliked all musicals because they claimed that it is not realistic for everyone to break out in simultaneous song and dance. I felt and still feel sorry for them because they were unwilling to experience that magic of briefly placing imagination above reality. Recognition of what is real is crucial to functioning as a sane adult. There is a time and place for reality, and that is most times and most places. However, to live life without giving in to those magical moments is to live a life devoid of creation and, I would argue, satisfaction. Magic is what makes reality bearable, and there's always so much reality in need of bearing. Entertainment can be a form of escapism that allows viewers to leave behind the real world for a moment of magic by briefly setting aside what we know to be reality. This type of illusion requires the consent of viewers to momentarily release what they know from experience and give themselves over to the fantasy. In other words, it needs your assistance in your own belief. Cinema often seeks to make the unreal as apparently real as possible through CGI and intense editing, and aided by the limited senses required to interact with the video. If it looks real and sounds real, then no one questions its temperature, how it smells, or what it feels like. The theater, on the other hand, has the challenge of making the real as unreal as possible. On the stage, I have seen a few spotlights become a jail cell, some PVC pipe and styrofoam become a walking, talking horse. I don't believe that an audience in the theater is ever expected to believe that this puppet horse with a person clearly inside is indeed a real animal, any more than viewers of Hamilton are expected to believe that our founding fathers were rapping their way through history. The magic is in the presentation and interpretation. Distortion, on the other hand, is not so consensual and not so recognizable as magic, which may make it more pervasive. I describe distortion as something unconscious, something that seeps in when we are not looking for it, and alters our perception of reality without our awareness of the change. When reflecting upon my own experiences, what I witness of others, and what I learned from my research, I see two main distortions stemming from our current forms of entertainment: the distortions of time and of self. Distortion of time seems to go hand in hand with highly accessible digital media. We not only have the ability to consume at whatever time we like, we also have access to view entertainment across time. Streaming, we can jump easily through time watching films that were produced anywhere from 1 to 100 years ago. In this way, contemporary spectators have some element of time travel available to them. Yet a much stronger pusher of distortion comes from the lack of time constraints in engagement with social media. Live performances, film, TV shows, books, even human lives all have a clearly defined beginning and ending. We can jump back and forth in the timeline of a movie, but it still has a time range of, say, 0 to 1 hour and 37 minutes, and no matter how much we manipulate that timeline, the story will still play the same scene at that same time marker. Social media is a come-and-go interactive media. There is no real start to a person's feed. It updates constantly. There is no discernible end to the experience. There is a constant influx of content and no way to mark the time spent consuming it. A person's experience with such media must rely on either intense self-control and premeditated stipulations, or the interruption of another need, such as food, sleep, or work, in order to end that experience. Even then, until the deletion of an app, the experience is not ended, but merely paused until the next phone pickup. Through this lens, we are in a constant state of consumption, even when doing other things, and will be so with no finality as long as we choose to interact with that media. Hahn describes that such lack of temporalization results in, quote, no narrative progress, end quote, leading to a, quote, inability to distinguish between what is important and what is unimportant, end quote. He elaborates, quote, this inability to produce a narrative synthesis, which is also an incapacity for temporal synthesis, calls forth a crisis of identity. The temporal crisis is an identity crisis. Due to the lack of narrative suspense, it is also not possible to conclude the story in a meaningful way, end quote. I think that this quote's mention of conclusions points to that lack of beginning and ending in contemporary consumption. The following crisis of identity is the second distortion that I have recognized stemming from social media. The virtual age also provides us with a distortion of self. Technology has given us a hypervigilance regarding our sense of self, far more than is natural. Before technology, most people would hardly see themselves or think about what they look like. For many humans since the dawn, mirrors might not be commonplace, and most people would not possess photos or drawings of themselves. Now we are very aware of the eyes upon us, and we see our image constantly, causing us to think about our image in everything we do. There is also a threat that at any point that we find ourselves around cameras, which in 2023 is almost constantly, our appearance has the possibility of being immortalized in a photo or video and distributed across the world. Our phones become physical mirrors, allowing us to see our image at any time in the hopes of correcting mistakes or receiving affirmations such as likes on our selfies. Metaphorically, phones are mirrors we stare into trying to figure out our identities based upon our interactions. We are often aware of our physical likeness captured in pictures, but data trafficking often goes unnoticed. Who we follow, what we Google search, and what ads we click return to haunt us and what content the algorithms decide to show us. People living in digital cultures are implored to scrutinize the self because our identities are constantly in question, constantly at the forefront of our existence. We can either end up in an existential spiral of trying to understand who we really are, or who we should be, or who we would rather be, or we can find a means of escape. One drastic method of escape would be the abandonment of technology and retreat to rural areas. Impractical for most Americans, we turn to an escape that we can utilize while simultaneously immersed in the digital and social scrutiny, masking. The mask is a control over the gaze and has always been a central element to the theater as a physical and social construct. I will not go into a long history of masks as utilized in storytelling, masquerades, Halloween costumes, and the like. The main idea is rather self-explanatory. Wearing a mask is like saying to someone, "Look at me, but don't see me." What I will mention is the way that physical masks are typically very obvious. When you come face to face with someone wearing a mask, there is either an uncanniness or a complete distortion of features alerting you that what you see is not a face. Social media again tests the limits of reality distortion by offering masks, filters, that allow creators to manipulate their facial features, hair and eye color, background, and more at the tap of a screen. These masks can be outrageous costumes or very subtle ways to subvert insecurities and reach for some kind of perfection. The new standard for human beauty is literally CGI. The mask even extends beyond the face to the voice. Platforms like TikTok that thrive on reuse of sound bites encourage creators to lip sync. This is profound in the sense that they are promoting users that have no voice. Many creators speak with the voice and words of other people according to the viral sound. There are some original content creators, but the majority of users resort to these tactics to attract attention. Popularity is achieved through simulation. What might this come to mean when paired with an art world that tries, or claims to try, to encourage diversity and originality? In a sort of pushback with this distorted digital reality, my work examines the tactile, textile worlds. I seek to engage viewers with a visual, aesthetic image to meet them where they are comfortable, while asking them to confront the physical presence and important tactility of my chosen media. The fact remains that however digital our society becomes, we are simultaneously living in the physical world and jump between the two worlds instantaneously and frequently. This complicated relationship of living simultaneously in two very different worlds, the physical and the digital, the private and the public, fuels my need for a tactile media to express my more abstract thoughts. The subject matter addresses elements of my viewers' everyday digital lives, while the medium provides a sensational experience that reminds viewers of their physical environment. The installation and scale of my work invoke the art meant to be seen by a public audience, while the domestic-inspired materials and techniques invoke the intimacy of a private home. The word timeline was once used to describe most social media algorithms, which prevented information chronologically. If this was the norm for virtual interaction, my work might take on a different perspective on digital media. The idea of using social media specifically to keep track of time in one's life or the life of others sounds like something that could have the potential to enhance our understanding of time. Now that the chronological algorithm is outdated, these endless lines of information are typically referred to as a feed. I find this new term to be both playful and gluttonous when used in the context of media that is consumed by viewers. We log on to our homepages to consume this feed, which is endless and ever-growing, and our appetite seems to never be satiated. I do not like that there is no perceivable end to this experience. All of the other media that I've discussed today, I have repeatedly said has a beginning and an end. Even art exhibitions, museums, clubs, and social spaces have a closing time where patrons must leave and the stage be reset. Feed-based entertainment and information sharing, however, has no beginning or end. It provides perhaps the most dangerous form of narcosis that entertainment can give, one that steals time away from its victims. Through Scroll, I hope to engage viewers with questions about their own personal performativity, reaction to gaze, consumption of media, and presence on the physical and virtual stage. I am not asking viewers to rebuke the use of technology or abandon social media. I am not encouraging viewers with little use of technology to join in on the digital culture. My goal is to create a discussion promoting self-awareness in the midst of info inundation. I propose an awareness of time and self. We witness hours upon hours of content and lose sight of what was consumed with the simple turning off of the screen. I seek to gain that time back and put perspective on the overwhelming amount of information we consume without realizing. In the metaphors of life, it is hard to say whether a theatrical or a film analogy is more performative. Improvising in front of a large audience requires a stage presence, quick thinking, and commitment to the role, whereas producing a film allows for rehearsal, revision, and a manipulation of time. In a way, there is an aspect of life that is still most closely connected to live theater. In all off-screen and human interaction, life is more like a live performance that can change instantly, must allow for things to go wrong, and requires improvisation because there really is no script. Or perhaps you prefer to think about your life story as you think about social media. Perhaps you have a great control over what you put out into the world with significantly less control over what the world sends back. Perhaps it is not about the message you send or the words you choose, but the amount of people encountered along the way. It might be about following the stories of others, connecting with people across space, or ensuring that your story is being told to someone, to anyone who will listen. There may be a fear that your story will be lost in the sea of infinite others, and perhaps it will. Such fading has always occurred with life stories. Some are preserved in the history, legends, and legacies they influenced during their time. Some are remembered only by the few lives that they left behind, but those are typically the stories most treasured. I propose that by straddling the tactile and the digital, the theatrical and the cinematographic, we can find our presentness when we treat our life like a Broadway production that is simultaneously being filmed. We have a live audience and compulsion to be present, to improvise, but we must still be mindful that our choices and actions will be remembered long after this moment. We must also recognize the importance of our role in the lives of those around us. When we are not the main character, we must think about what kind of supporting role we want to assume. When we are spectators in life and in the spectacle, it is our choice how much we will pay attention, how invested we will be, and whether or not we will seek out the truth or surrender to the illusion on stage. Will you watch from the balcony, viewing the big picture but lacking the full story? Will you sit in the front row, close enough to see the actors in great detail, but perhaps too close to see the full setting around them? Will you follow the actor backstage? And if so, will you be prepared for the removal of the mask and the truth that lies under the projection? Or do you picture yourself entirely outside the theatrical metaphor, preferring to view others' timelines from a point of secrecy with great control over who can view your own? I have spent an entire thesis trying to describe to you who you are, but that ultimate definition is not up to me. I have asked questions that I imagine to be universal, but they're only relevant if you are asking them of yourselves. Perhaps when it comes down to it, the real metaphor I have been describing is not that of the theater, but of the mirror backstage. In that dressing room, you enter the person you are, with the option to don a variety of facades. Can you count the costumes you wear at any given point? If you can, whether disguised or stripped bare, do you find yourself capable of approaching the dressing room mirror? If so, are you willing to look inside? How clearly do you see your own reflection? Is the face looking back at you one that you recognize? Is your reflection the person you desire to be? If not, How much time do you think you have to dress the part? The theater is your mind. Who is watching from the audience? The stage is where others can see you. Do you reside in the spotlight or linger in the shadows? Backstage is where your secrets lie. What curtains are needed to keep them hidden? The dressing room is where you construct your character. What costume do you wear? The theater is also the mind of others. Whose theater do you visit? You purchase your ticket. How close or far away do you sit? You watch the performance. Can you see beyond the other actor's mask? These are the questions that I ask myself when I am constructing a narrative, and the questions I implore others to ponder. Using the metaphor of the theater, paired with more pervasive contemporary media, I create work to make viewers self-aware, not in a negative manner, but an introspective one. The stories told on your stage and those whispered behind the curtains will form memories. The memories you make in this theater will be collected in bits and pieces and slowly stitched together like a patchwork quilt until a larger picture emerges. What narrative are you constructing? Thank you.